Okay. Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight to learn about attachment and trauma within kink. And my class is binding and bonding. A lot of people teach about this subject, and it's always a good subject, even if it's not my version. So, like, feel free to learn about the other versions that are out there of this topic area too. But you'll notice that I give access to the slides usually with this, and there are some links throughout the slides. If you have any problems throughout the class, you can please let me know, and I will be happy to help and answer any questions, or, go down a little bit of a rabbit hole, just a little one, not a big one. Let's get underway. So, this is our agenda for binding and bonding tonight. A little bit about me. I always like to give a little bit of an thorough introduction to give my cultural biases, my lenses of how I view this topic and every topic I teach about. I think that is kind of helpful in seeing where I come from. We're going to then talk about the basics of attachment theory and attachment styles, the basics of trauma theory, how it may affect our relationships, and then understanding attachment and a little bit of that trauma piece and the play with attachment theory, because they kind of go together a lot of the time. Looking specifically at a kink lens of those topics and how you can bring about a strength in those areas in your kinky lives. Maybe it's just play kink or relationship kink. Either way, we'll talk about different ways to develop your safe haven and secure bases in your kinky lives. And we'll go on about what secure base and safe haven is. But first, me. I am Mistress Cas. You don't have to call me Mistress unless like we've negotiated that. You can call me Miss Cas, whatever. I am a public health scientist turned mental health clinician and sex therapist at Respark Therapy. I started very much in that public health realm and thinking about like social determinants of disease, infectious disease, highly stigmatized diseases like STIs and tuberculosis. And then, decided I wanted to relate to people more and interact with people more and not be behind a spreadsheet all the time. And so I followed this new path. And in my new path, I am very much a what we call a neuronarrative therapist. And so there's a lot of attachment theory in that. There's a lot of neurology. There's a lot of understanding of our neurosystems and trauma and the stories we all hold about all that stuff and everything else in the world. I also work as a love and pleasure coach and consultant under Bold Hearts Education. I have been kinky and polyamorous since the beginning of my life. From a wee little kid, I had those inclinations, and I've been involved in those communities for about 12 years now. Been teaching for 5 years now. And then some other things that I think impact how I perceive all this topic and other topics is that I am fat, I am neurodivergent, I am a damn Yankee, meaning I was born in the North in Long Island, New York, but I've been in Texas a really long time now. And I'm even married a generational Texan. And so I'm a damn Yankee because I stayed. Though that will definitely impact my language. I definitely still use guys. I know it's not interpreted as gender neutral as I was raised to believe it to be. And I try to use y'all more than that phrase, but forgive me, it does slip out. Always trying to embrace my being a Texan now. I'm also witchy. I am crazy. I have bipolar disorder. And I embrace that term. I'm mixed race, but white passing, obviously. And I do consider myself disabled. And that all brought me to learning about attachment theory before I even became a mental health clinician. I was like a relationship nerd. Um, and attachment theory is been pretty popular within relationship development stuff for at least like 5 to 10 years now. And it's gotten even more popular recently in our sex positive worlds, thanks to Jessica Fern doing her book Polysecure. And now it's just super prevalent now, and it's almost an essential understanding to build in these worlds. Let's go a little deeper. Attachment is an emotional, and sometimes more, like it can be sexual, it could be physical, it could be spiritual, but it's mostly an emotional bond with another person or yourself. Attachment forms early with our caregivers, like our parents, in order to increase our chances for survival into adulthood. So the idea is that if the baby develops a positive attachment model with their caregiver, that means the caregiver is going to be more receptive to their survival needs. They're going to listen to them when they're hungry. They're going to give them food when they're hungry. They're going to change their diaper when it's wet and they cry about it. And if there's that attunement, you're more likely to survive into adulthood. So children very much might, not attune in what seems like a very strong, healthy way to some people, but it's really for the purpose of helping them survive and get through the world. Children will take on beliefs about, I am such a bad kid, but I'm horrible, so that it aligns with their caregivers sometimes so that they can feel more attuned to their caregivers and therefore, still receive some attention from them. That's oftentimes a lot of where like really, really extremely low self-confidence things come from. Attachment theory was invented originally by John Bowlby, who was a British psychologist, and he was studying the effect of removing children from their families during the Blitz in London and sending them to the countryside for safekeeping. The impact of that break in attachment from their mostly mother figures. It was a while ago, so that was mostly the focus, was mothers as caregivers. And it was the first time in Western psychology that we really saw more of a value of social relationships in the overall health of a person. Bowlby was not treated very kindly later in his career because of this theory during his life. It was a time where we had more Freud and like analysis and all these like more science heavy, if you could call them that, theories. They're not necessarily more science heavy. It's just, they aligned with that narrative. In the 80s and 90s, the attachment theory was further pioneered by Mary Ainsworth. She studied the strange experiment, the strange situation was her experiment, where she would put a mother and a young toddler age child together in a room with like a two-way mirror so that they could see what was going on. And they would try different interactions of like the mother leaving the room and the child being alone, a stranger coming into the room and the child being alone with the stranger, and then like, the mother coming back at some point, all these different variations of that. And they got to really see the connection of caregivers with their children and the impact of that on just in the moment, the regulation of the child, but also like they were doing a lot of connections in like health throughout the life of the child from that experiment. And like I mentioned more recently, attachment theory has been pioneered by Jessica Fern's use of it within polyamory. I think it is great to take these Western psychological theories that are often focused on this white Eurocentric point of view and apply them to slightly different or totally different populations, and learning what has to be dropped and what you can keep. And I think that's a great way to bring other theories into the forefront and make them more applicable to modern worlds. There's a lot more about attachment here. So, and I'll again encourage y'all to ask any questions through the chat if you need anything or need a clarification. But otherwise, I will move on to these two really, really big, like, core tenets of attachment theory, and that's security and safety. I love, love, love this graphic of the circle of security, showing how a parent can attend to a child's needs via the use of being a secure base and a safe haven for their child. And this works the same with us and ourselves, like parenting ourselves and relating to ourselves. We can have this same sort of thing. We can also have this circle of security and safety within our adult romantic or love or sex or kink relationships. This is not just limited to child rearing, but great example, and it's also, the foundation of attachment theory came from that, so it's a good way to understand the larger concept. But essentially, secure base is the child feeling secure enough to take risks. This child feels like they can explore the world around them and know that parent is still watching their back. Know that they still are supported, but they can go take that risk and go out into the world and play on the monkey bars and risk skinning their knee because they know they have the security that they are being watched over, that they are being delighted in, that they will receive help in their mission of exploration and curiosity. And they might even get have some playtime with their caregiver in the security building sense. If like a child running to the play gym, at some point, the parent might, push them on the swings and play with them. And it's the same in adult relationships too. Especially with DS power exchange relationships. Imagine, applying this like as a dominant to a submissive, and vice versa, submissive applying this to their long-term dominant, where they, support each other in the building of their kink profile, their kink crafts. They support each other in demoing with a new kink with someone else, maybe. Just playing together alone can build security. And other things that we're going to go through with that, could be more specific to kink and how to build security down the line later in the class. So this whole circle of security is because, secure base is going out into the world, and then you wrap around, you skin your knee on the play gym, and it comes back around into safe haven, being able to return to the safe harbor of a caregiver, knowing that the child will be welcomed when they need to be welcomed by their caregiver back to home safety. The child needs to know that they will be safe, they will receive protection, they will receive comfort, there will be some delight in these feelings, and they will help organize these feelings. Let the child vent about it and be like, that sounds like really sad. That sounds really hard. Empathy and, a little bit of emotional education too when it's a child. And again, We want this in our adult relationships too. Like, I think about in my personal life when my partner in our polyamorous world goes through a heartbreak. I want to be able to be there for them, to create a sense of safety around that heartbreak feeling. And maybe I might have to be some honest, loving truths down the line, but initially it's all about rebuilding that safety and being there for them during that heartbreak. Or, an issue at work or whatever the thing is. The whole point of this secure base and safe haven is that the caregiver role is to be bigger and stronger and wiser and kinder, and to follow the needs of the other person without, you know, always taking charge. Taking charge when necessary, yes. Like in the case of a dominant and a submissive relationship, I don't want to always take charge 100% of the time. I don't need to either. I want to build a sense of security in my, submissive to take care of themselves in a lot of ways, not all the ways, but I will take charge when I need to and when necessary. And, you need pre-negotiate when that is, where your line is with that. I love this quote from John Bowlby. If you remember, like in the last slide, he was the creator of attachment theory. He said, attachment exerts an invisible but powerful pull on the child. Just as heavenly bodies are connected by gravitational forces, but unlike gravity, attachment makes its presence known by a negative inverse square law. The further the attached person is from their secure base, the greater the pull of attachment. This is talking a little bit about polarity relationships, but also that sense of gravity, using that word gravity for it, I just love. Think about as an adult, if you've been with someone and you've loved them in a relationship and now you're going to be long distance or be away from each other for a long period of time, and then you come back together, you can feel that gravity. You can feel the not slingshot, rubber band effect of coming back to each other in that moment. And attachment really is that gravity, and knowing it's always there. Gravity doesn't leave, just like our attachments to other humans. They don't entirely go away, even if we work on making them go away through therapy and other stuff. Okay. So now let's talk about a little bit more about attachment styles, and this is more towards adults. Yes, you can see these styles in children and adolescents too. But we're going to get closer more to the adult side of this now. So this is a lovely graph that is very similar to the one that's in Jessica Fern's book, just a little different. But it divides the attachment styles into two spectrums of attachment. So the idea is that you have this horizontal spectrum where you have low anxiety on the left and high anxiety on the right. And then you have this vertical spectrum of high avoidance on the bottom and low avoidance on the top. And so the idea is that you're going to always hit somewhere in these quadrants here. If you are low avoidance and low anxiety, generally we're going to describe that as secure attachment. So secure attachment looks like confidence. It looks reciprocal. It is often resilient and balanced and fluid. It flows with the needs of the moment, and sometimes the needs of the moment might require some more anxiety. The needs of the moment might require a higher avoidance. And so being flexible with that is part of being secure. And I have a quote just that, gives an example of what a secure person might say. They would be more along the lines of saying, I don't worry about being abandoned or about someone getting too close to me. They don't worry about those extremes. They're pretty confident and secure in the middle, in the gray. Most people qualify as secure, not, one of the other. But people do change and they bounce around. Over on the right side of the quadrants, on the upper right, we have anxious, preoccupied attachment. This is the things associated with like emotional hunger, maybe fantasy bonds, maybe some turbulence, a lot of like what you might think of as like a neediness. Externally, that might be what it looks like. Someone with an anxious attachment style would possibly say, I want to be extremely emotionally close with others, but they abandon/hurt me. This is the person that pursues attachments, and they often, will, feel a little anxious if there is perceived avoidance going. Yes, so someone asked, is there often variations in attachment style for someone based on the type of relationship? So I'm guessing you mean for a single person, can they have different variations in their attachment style based on their different relationships? I think is what you
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was asking. I was also thinking of like, might somebody feel really secure in like friendships, but get really like anxious, preoccupied about romantic connections or things like that. Like depending on this, like where in which they've like felt like let down or disconnected or things like that.
Absolutely. And that's why I match trauma and attachment theory in my work. Because like that's a big part of it is like you can have more trauma or baggage in your friendships than your romantic relationships in your history. And therefore, romantic relationships? I'm totally secure in romantic relationships. Making friends? Ooh, that's scary. I might or might not be talking about myself. um, and so like it can look different based on different relationship styles. Maybe you have a lot of avoidance with your family relationships, but you're pretty secure in your friendships and maybe just a little anxious in your romantic relationships. That's totally possible. Thank you for that question. So we did anxious, preoccupied, yes. The bottom left quadrant of this graph that is, showing you as low anxiety but high avoidance is the dismissive avoidant type of style. This looks a little bit more like social isolation, maybe aloofness, ambiguity, ambivalence, um, general emotional distance, perceived emotional distance, anyway. And someone who is dismissive might say something like, it's very important that I feel independent and self-sufficient in my relationships. Um, and like I kind of mentioned earlier, like a little bit of avoidance or a little bit of anxiousness might be healthy depending on the situation or the relationship. It's when it goes to an extreme that it's something we want. So those are like the main three categories people think about and talk about and know about within attachment styles. But there is this other style, the fourth style, which is high avoidance and high anxiety. And that's the fearful avoidant. Uh, they might there might be other labels for this category sometimes. Sometimes it's like disorganized attachment, those label it as that. This is about internal conflict, unpredictability, ambivalence, hot, cold, back and forth. I like to think of disorganized attachment as much more like your feet are on both the brake and the gas at the same time. You desperately want to connect. You're anxious about not connecting enough, but you also are terrified of attachments and they've hurt you a lot in the past. And you also just like That's scary. And so you have both of those pressures pulling you back and forth in your relationships, whether that's with others or maybe it's with yourself. I see a lot of disorganized attachment with self amongst people with substance misuse histories, um, or people who identify as addicts. They might have that disorganized attachment with the self. If you don't already kind of put yourself in like an understanding of yourself in this style map, I guess, of here, there is a quiz on the left-hand side of the screen. I linked it to that you can take to really get an idea what your attachment is in different realms of your life, different relationships, if you don't already kind of have an inkling based on just listening to this today. And yeah, I like quizzes. Not everyone does. And the thing about attachment, we pointed out that attachment can be different from relationship to relationship. It can be very different over time. You can heal, you can get worse in different areas. Or you can just kind of go up and down depending on life circumstances, and that again might be healthy or it might not. Our styles change with time, different settings, different relationships. And so I was wondering if you guys wanted to share, of course, not requiring it, of course. But what has affected the expression of your attachment style in the past? Has there been anything that like made you show more avoidance or led you to show more anxiousness or more disorganization or even security? What helps you get to that level you're thinking of? I know for me, there's a lot of changing with time with people. More security comes with more time and vice versa. Yeah, someone has their hand raised. You can talk.
I was just gonna answer your question with my life experiences definitely changed my style, my attachment style. I've been much more guarded after bad, really bad, ugly experience. Much more careful.
Makes
Yeah.
sense. Like you would need some time to heal, so it makes total sense that you would kind of like
Yeah.
pull back in, and lick your wounds, so to speak.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Mm.
Someone else said, lack of vulnerability in my relationships made me boundary up. If I don't feel safe, I can't feel connected. Or if the other person can't feel safe, I can't feel connected. Yes. Yeah. They're not seeing a vulnerability is a big one for me too. It gives me permission to be vulnerable myself. And so like I'm gonna be a lot more avoidant in a relationship, or maybe sometimes anxious, if I'm not sensing vulnerability from another person. Similar.
I I'm finding so I'm about like I'm a person who's medically transitioning,
Mhm.
and I know for me, I think that like I never would have necessarily like considered myself to be more in like the dismissive avoidant, but there's pieces of that that come up now because I think like part of the process of just like being a trans person and like living in the current world is less like you kind of have to like distance yourself from some stuff or you'll go nuts. And so that feels like a thing that I didn't necessarily ever think that would be in my survival toolkit, but it's kind of like a necessary evil to just like put on blinders to and limit the scope and number of people who can hurt you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're protecting your vibe in a way and protecting your
Hmm.
energy and boundarying up around it. Like that makes total sense when you have something that is often uh, used as a reason for disconnection more than it should. Um, yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, everything can affect our attachment, uh, especially if it's social in some realm. And most things in this world have a social component. Um, Going to the grocery store has a social component. You're still exchanging money for food. You're making an exchange with a person or, a conglomerate of people. Everything kind of can be traced back to connection in our world, socialness. I know I'm hella avoidant when it comes to medical professionals because of that relationship being not trusted in the past. Not the same avoidance in other areas with other types of people. Okay, we're gonna go more into trauma now. So trauma has been a very popular concept, mostly since James Van Der Kolk came out with The Body Keeps the Score. That's become like that brought into a really, really popular stage. And some people say that like trauma hasn't been around a long time. We have known about trauma for a really long time. We just didn't have the same definitions of the word. We didn't have the same concepts in our like Western societies. But that word trauma comes from Greek, ancient Greek, meaning a wound, whether that was physical, psychic, emotional, intellectual, it was still a trauma. But nowadays we have varied definitions, and different diagnostic manuals create different criteria for what meets the definition of trauma. But generally, trauma is the mental or physiological effects of a dangerous event in someone's life. That can be capital T trauma, meaning, a really super life-threatening event, or repeated life-threatening events. Maybe it's a lowercase t trauma, meaning, your dog died of like natural causes. That could be a lowercase t trauma. Lowercase t trauma could be natural life developmental stages, just having a hard time getting through them, creating a little baggage along the way. Then we also have the like diagnostic stuff of PTSD and complex PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder is more associated with things like a singular life-threatening event. PTSD has become much more popular since we've been taking care of veterans and their war traumas and how that has affected them psychologically. And then complex PTSD is more about repeated traumatic events. Maybe life-threatening, maybe not. The repetition creates a complexity to the symptoms. Complex PTSD is not necessarily a diagnosis in the DSM in America, but it is a diagnosis in the International Classification of Disease, the ICD. Yeah, I could go on and on about diagnostic criteria because I am an epidemiologist and a mental health clinician. But I will simply say that I prefer the ICD diagnostic criteria for complex PTSD than some of the recommended diagnostic criteria for it in the US, because it is very much symptom-based, not etiology-based, meaning it's not based on like how many traumatic events you had necessarily, or like what type of traumatic events you had, but it's focused on the symptoms that you are expressing because of whatever the trauma was. So it, describes the severity and complexity of almost like a personality level event of symptoms. And they're so entrenched usually in a different way than PTSD. But not always. There can be overlap. You can have both. But I really like the Greek origin of the word trauma too. Like just to remember that it's a wound. Okay. So I'm guessing almost everyone who's probably like gonna watch this recording or is in the class today has heard of like fight, flight, and freeze. maybe even submit fawn, which is like the new part. These are the classifications of the type of responses we have to crisis and trauma and stress of any nature. Yeah, our nervous systems create these different types of responses so that we can survive. But as I kind of mentioned earlier on, attachment is a survival tactic, especially for the young, but it's for everyone too. So I broke it down here to kind of compare the different types of nervous system response to crisis. There is fight, which we think of as vigilance. You're gonna go to fisticuffs with someone. Fight, is that angry, judgmental, mistrustful, self-destructive, controlling, possibly even suicidal symptoms. To the extreme, of course. All these are taken more to the extreme, not like a more middle ground reaction. Flight is escaping the crisis, the danger. It is about distancing, maybe being ambivalent. It could look like not being able to commit. It can even look like addictive behavior. Freeze is more of a fear response. And so you're often going to see something like a person freezing, getting so frozen and stuck in that, being terrified, being very wary and suspicious, phobic of like being seen or perceived. Panic attacks can fall underneath freeze. A little different look, but yeah, it falls there a lot of the time. And at the bottom is what some people are starting to understand is there's this submit kind of fawn part of our nervous system response, which is often connected to a sense of shame. And it's very similar to attachment, just slightly different though. The shame aspect of it is more insidious, I think. It can lead to symptoms like depression, feeling ashamed, becoming too passive, maybe too much of a good girl, good boy, good person. You tend to want to serve as a caretaker of others to prove yourself, maybe, and doing that in such a way that it's like self-sacrificing. You're not believing that you should put yourself first. The best way to survive this crisis or survive this stress, this danger, this trauma is to put someone else first. Which, like, if you think about the stereotypical like eldest daughter trauma, that's a great example. It's like, okay, eldest daughter trauma, I'm going to take care of the whole family because that's going to make sure I survive and my family survives. And then there is the attach stress response. People do physiologically yearn for attachment when they are stressed out in some situations, when they are facing trauma. And this, to an extreme might seem desperate for attention. It might appear as a really intense craving for rescue or connection. It may come across as a little, like the person might come across as a little innocent, maybe, or naive, possibly. Not always, though. But generally, it's wanting a protector. It's like, can someone help me? Maybe not necessarily a superhero, a white knight kind of thing, but like I need help to get through this. And so I'll ask you guys if you want to contribute. Do you seek connection when you're hurt or in crisis at times?
I
If I could
try
ask
to.
a
Sorry.
if I could ask a quick question and like in response to this, so like I've often seen this framed as like fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or fuck, and I'm wondering if so is the fuck just the piece that people have like been drawn to, like actually just like a variation on or a narrowing of like that attachment piece, because ultimately it's like seeking this like, how do I like do that, or is that like a just like a gross misunderstanding of that? Because I've seen it framed that way in a couple different. I'm just wondering like where is that coming from? Like, is it coming from a piece of like a misinterpretation of like the attachment needy thing? Is it a variation also on like, because sometimes like the fuck is actually to submit,
Yeah.
right? Like and like submission to circumstance, not like submission as in like kink submission, but like
Yeah.
you know.
I think it can work applied that way. So the only problem and why I don't necessarily say that unless I'm like needing some funny shorthand in the moment, is because fucking sex is so intersectional and can apply to so many different needs and stress response reactions. You can be pursuing sex for the purpose of procreation, and that might be under the attachment. It might be though under one of the other ones, or it might just be the more biological like urge to put a legacy out. It can fall under that. It, like you said, sex can fall under a submission fawning sort of category too, where to give sex is to appeal to the other person and the dynamic, the relationship. Um, yeah, sex could be a way to run away. um, I'm going to run away from my really hard feelings about the thing, so I'm going to fuck about it instead. Sex is so diverse in its own ways, um, that like, yeah, that does work, but not always. I think it can be very much applied underneath all these different categories, honestly. Like if you think about, someone who might get woken up to a sexual encounter. Maybe it's someone they're fine with having sex with, like from waking up and everything, but they're just like a little startled and they freeze. Like that's an example of freezing for sex. Like, and it can go to all these different ways. But I definitely think of it, the attachment angle is a little different um, than just, fucking to fawn to someone or something. Yeah. I know I sometimes seek attachment in my crisis modes, but not always. Hmm. Someone else was going to talk. I can't remember who it was. Oh, is that wrong? Okay. Well, if does anyone else seek connection when hurt or in crisis? Okay. And if you want to,
I think I definitely go into like sometimes like that knee piece around like anxiously like seeking like assurance, confirmation of place, um pieces that are like worried about like abandonment, stuff like that. So those kinds of things, and like and then there's certainly less like but then there's other times where like particularly for me like vigilance will show up sometimes too, especially um um if I'm feeling particularly aware of the ways in which I'm like marginalized within society, then vigilance will show up and be those like yeah, in like hypervigilance is pretty common for queer folks and things like that.
Yeah, it is very common for us, and it's also this um mixed states thing too. Like it's very normal to have a little bit of one category and a little bit of this, to have a mixed stress response state. That's normal too. Yeah, person with their hand raised.
Yeah, I was gonna say, to answer your question, I try when I'm in situations that are difficult for me, I try and reach out to my people for support. I try and keep my people close who I feel that with, which is very limited. but I'm mindful of it. And also, when I don't hear from people for a while, I try and reach out because that usually is when people are having a harder time, even though that's when they need the help the most. So I
Yeah.
try and be mindful of that stuff and not rely on my own my own head to sort stuff out. Because that usually, with people, it doesn't always work. You can head
Yeah.
trip a lot on things. So I try to do that.
That sounds like a really effective reaction for you. Yeah. And I know it is for a lot of people a lot of the time. Even for me, like generally I am a disorganized sort of attachment leaning avoidance, and I often will react with to isolate and to avoid, but not always. There is some change here and there with different people in different settings.
I actually do that too sometimes. I mean, sometimes I know I'll be on the phone with people, but I do isolate. It's definitely a tactic I use.
Yep.
I have to protect my energy, so I'll be
Yep.
mindful of that as well.
Protect your vibe.
Yep.
Okay. Well, and you guys have the access to the slides, so if you want to look back on this, you definitely can. And just a little bit to mention the different levels of society that affect our crisis responses and our trauma. This is the nested model of attachment and trauma from Jessica Fern in her book Polysecure. And she uses this model to explain how trauma can happen at these various levels of society. It can be a trauma within itself, maybe like a medical crisis of some nature. It can be trauma from your relationships. It can be trauma from your home life. It can be trauma from your local community or culture. It can be a larger societal level, like a nation, for example, or maybe even a religion. And then there's this global or collective level too that you can experience trauma. Some people experience a crisis response or trauma from global level events like climate change. People experience a sense of internal crisis sometimes when they talk about or learn about climate change. Very valid to feel the weight of the world imploding when you learn about some of those things and other things throughout this world. And so it's important to keep in mind that there are these different levels, and we don't have as much control over these higher levels sometimes. And we can influence the higher levels. We can definitely try to be responsible for what we can, but we just don't have as much power uh, at those levels as we often do at the lower levels, like self, relationships, home, and local. If this interests you, even if you're not polyamorous, I would still recommend Polysecure by Jessica Fern. So I mentioned trauma diagnoses earlier, and I think it's kind of important to talk about those diagnoses a little bit more in depth. I don't know about you, but I see these diagnoses very often in kink worlds and queer worlds too. That's not because kinky queer people are kinky or queer because of their trauma. No, we are realizing now that people often, once they are divergent from whatever the norm is in some form or manner, they become more accepting of their divergence in other realms of life. So it's like, oh, I was traumatized as a child. I am now had to relearn like paradigms and views of the world and challenge my perceptions and things in this area with my trauma. So why not challenge myself in that way with my queerness or my kinkiness? You know, that's small potatoes compared to my childhood trauma. That kind of thing. But these trauma disorders have a lot of overlap between them, but they're not all the same as each other either. So, you know, we talked a little bit about PTSD and complex PTSD and their familiarities earlier, and they do share a sense of threat, a sense of a persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the trauma. They also experience recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive distressing memories of the event. But the things that are a little different from post-traumatic stress disorder and complex PTSD is with the complex PTSD, you're going to have a lot more prevalence of affect dysregulation, like emotional dysregulation. You're going to have a lot deeper of a negative self-concept and low self-esteem usually. And there's going to be a lot more social issues usually than with PTSD. There's some, but not the level that you see often with complex PTSD. And we are starting to learn a little bit more that borderline personality disorder often has a trauma background in the person's younger years. You know, it shares in what's some of the commonalities with complex PTSD. It has that emotional dysregulation, it has that negative self-concept and interpersonal disturbances. But borderline personality disorder also includes things like disassociation and paranoia. It includes avoidance of real or imagined abandonment, and not just like a little avoidance, like a normal level of avoidance. This is like going above and beyond to avoid these real or imagined abandonments, and kind of like getting really, really obsessed with the idea of it. Also with borderline personality disorder, there's often a shifting sense of self. Their self-identity can often move and be fluid more, and you maybe they have a little bit of that personality chameleon thing, where they like shape their personality in accordance with whatever social situation they're in. All three of these have the exposure to actual or threat of death or serious injury or violence, though. Yeah, someone had a question.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if what you're talking about is, I forget, it's called is it the same thing as, is it code switching? Something like that?
It can be. So code switching is not just associated with like disordered mental health, though. Code switching
Well,
is like everywhere. A lot of people do it
that's it.
for any reason.
I see.
But like if you think of code switching to just turn it up to 11
I got
to the point of that like it's becoming disordered in their life and they can't control it and it's affecting their stability.
I see. Thank you for explaining.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking. Okay. And you know, this is just a look at these disorders from a trauma lens. There's a lot more to learn about these disorders from like a more physiological lens, a more biomedical neurology lens. But, you know, if you are really curious about these things, please go forth and learn more. But we are going to move on for now and get a little more into the kink specific twists on attachment and understanding trauma. So I take the opinion that we are all healers. Every person in this world is able to be a healer if they want to. And to heal is to touch with love that which we have previously touched with fear. This is from Stephen Levy. It is about being able to react to a person who is experiencing hurt or trauma or baggage in some sort of way, to react to them in a way that is compassionate and empowering and like loving. And we can do it for ourselves too. Like we can brave ourselves, we can embrace ourselves, we can empower ourselves. Um, when we experience abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction as children, or even as adults with like domestic violence or assault, we become more likely to experience negative physical health and emotional health consequences. But these can be healed to some degree in a healthy adult attachments and therapy and other medical care too. I am not one of those people that says you have to learn how to love yourself before you like can be in a healthy, happy relationship. Everyone deserves to be raised with a caregiver relationship that instilled in them a sense of self, at least neutrality. Self-love would be great, but neutrality is what I was going to say, the minimum. But we don't all get raised with that. We don't all get to the point of adulthood knowing what love is for us, like, or for other people. We have no clue. So how are you supposed to learn without experiencing a little bit? Yes, you can learn by books and therapy and blah, 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 but experience is necessary. And so experiencing different sorts of relationship, like a kink relationship, kink play with friends, things like that, in a safer, more secure manner, touches the hurt parts of us and lets us be seen in a way that we know is a little safer. And it allows us to learn how to love ourselves, hopefully, too. That's the hope. Doesn't always work out that way, but you know, a lot of our most powerful relationships in our lives are the ones that taught us how to love ourselves better. And that's okay. It's okay to get into a relationship before you know how to love yourself. The thing is just not to rely on other people for your self-love and your self-worth. 100%. You know, everything to an extreme, dangerous, but you know, a little bit towards not in the middle. Yeah, that's fine. So I take the stance that kink can be really healing. You know, I like to think of kink in a definition as similar to the definition Midori uses, that kink is just childlike play with adult privilege and really cool toys. And to be able to play with the privilege like that of being an adult and really cool toys, that could be healing for a lot of people.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a great definition. And play is such a powerful thing in our lives. And we all need a little more, I think. And I also like to think that joy and play is resistance in this modern world too. So keep it up. So let's talk a little specifically about specific ways we can encourage healing trauma and building attachment from a kink lens. One of my favorites is bondage or pressure. Bondage and pressure create calm in our nervous system. You know, I've very much noticed with my autistic playmates that if I lean my body into them just a little bit, I'll create a little compression in the middle of a scene, they just like calm down. You know, of course, it's not going to be the same for everyone, but that bondage pressure thing really does create a sense of calm. And like, think about swaddling a baby, that pressure, it's the same sort of concept. So you can do that with rope, you can do that with chain, you can do that with bondage equipment, straight jackets, whatever your thing is, you know, with hopefully some harm reduction philosophy mixed in there. But that can really bring calm when you're in a crisis response sometimes. Yeah, someone had a
Yeah,
question.
you mentioned swaddling, and somebody recently made me realize, because I was into like mummification. One thing you didn't mention is pallet wrap,
Mhm.
bondage, and that kind of stuff resembles swaddling, and is very comforting. A lot of people find that, and the rope does the same thing.
Yeah,
Also, it's
yeah.
very similar. Yeah, it's great for that.
There's just like this biological, physiological part of us that when we're tightened up and into that is just like, ah, it's just like on a basic level. And it's really beautiful, I think, in that sense. And if you use it mindfully, even better. Another specific thing that you can incorporate into your kink is rhythmic moves and sensations. Think flogging in particular. This is a picture of me receiving fire flogging a long time ago. And rhythm is an essential part of our interpersonal biology and evolution. We evolved to respond to the rhythm of drums and human voice because that meant more safety from the lion. That meant more safety from the rival tribe. If we could find the social rhythm and the drum and connect back to that. We are meant to engage in rhythm. We are meant to run and to walk and to do rhythmic movement with the loom and things like that. So use that in your kink too. Yes, flogging is an example, but it can be other things too. Even just vanilla-like missionary PIV sex has a rhythm to it. And, you know, that rhythmic thing can be chilling out. It can be a calming up also. It's not just a calm down, but like a calm up, like it energizes you in a way, gets you activated in a good way. Yeah, rhythmic impact is just, it's one of my favorite things. I love mixing in music with my impact
Oh,
play.
same here. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a
it
great event at
helps.
the dungeon I volunteer at where they do a monthly event. It's literally rhythmic impact. It's everybody's in sync to the music and there's drumming. It's so cool.
Ooh,
Yeah, it's awesome.
that would be
It's awesome.
so
Everybody's in
awesome.
sync. The energy is shared in the whole space. It's awesome. It's awesome.
I'm gonna want to do something like that now.
Yeah, you should. It's awesome.
Yeah, have a couple of drummers. That would be great. Yeah, like I really encourage a lot of people to bring rhythm of some sort to their play if they're hoping to build, you know, healthy attachment bonds with their people.
That's almost my default when I do not so much the flogging, but more paddles and things. I like to use two rulers that
Mhm.
I can stack for intensity, and I love to use them like drumsticks on the body.
Nice. And they probably get a good slappy noise to it too.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But and the rhythm of noise too definitely impacts us as well as the sensation of rhythm. Both. Another specific way to encourage healthy attachment and to heal trauma within our kinky relationships is negotiated protocols and rituals. You know, knowing that a ritual is reliable and it is important, it is part of your routine, it creates a social rhythm and it creates that security concept we talked about, that safety concept we talked about. Knowing you can go back to this social rhythm routine of kneeling for your master every time they come home from work and putting you into that mode, that is reliable. That is something you can look forward to, know it's going to happen, and not never really doubt it until the relationship ends, of course. But you know, okay, they get home at 6 p.m. I'm going to be on my knees at like 6:01. And that's like part of my day. That is to be able to rely on social rhythms and value them so deeply and know the other person values them so deeply, that can be really healing and to know that and to feel that. These are other aspects that can help build attachment and heal trauma in our relationships. These things can be applied to non-kinky relationships, but just as much within kink too. Things like becoming skilled in turning towards yourself or others in conflict, I like to say conflict is always a bid for connection. So if there is some sort of conflict going on, look for what sort of connection is being attempted. They might not be going about it the right way, but usually that's the motivation. There are definitely specific skills you can learn in this category. Things like nonviolent communication is a great concept in philosophy. De-escalation tactics, uh, conscious conversations. I'm forgetting one of the other things. Mental health first aid. All these different things allow us to feel more empowered in crisis moments and to turn towards other people in these moments and turn towards ourselves, not avoid or run away. And that's a reliability thing too. Another aspect of what you can do to build attachment is embracing you and others for who they are. When we accept and love ourselves in the most authentic ways, only then can we be our best selves. We can't be a best at something if we're not truly authentic in it. I can't be an expert level athlete because I'm not passionate about any sort of like sports or things like that. I could dedicate multiple hours a day to it. I could be stubborn and dedicated to developing skills in this athletic quadrant of my life, but I'm still never going to be the best in that sense unless I have the passion and authenticity in that. And then also there's this find people with your values aspect of healing attachment. And this is about community. Make sure you surround yourself with others who share your values. If you are interacting with a group of people and you're like, not my vibe, not my values, doesn't mean they're a bad group of people. Just means that's not your authentic expression of what your values are. And you may need to find different people. Yeah. Was there another question?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I learned that one the hard way. I had friends when I first came into the community. I was trained out of the community by a mistress. And then when that ended, I entered the community on my own and I had a circle of friends that I thought were friends. And I didn't realize their values weren't exactly the same. I even had a kink sibling as a sister, and it got really ugly and I went away. I left the community and then I went to find the place I was telling you about, Kink Collective. And I don't go anywhere else. Like those are my people. I'm happy to help them. And they do so much for me because they have a safe space that's just different
Yeah.
than a lot of the spaces in New York City because they understand that stuff. They have the same values as me, and that's what I learned.
Yeah.
It makes
That's
it a
such a
difference.
hard lesson sometimes too.
Oh man, it was so bad. I didn't want to deal with anybody because I was already dealing with the world, and then like this was the last corner of the world where it was safe because the community, but not everybody in the community has the same values. People who are leather are not the same as weekend kinksters. And I learned that. I definitely learned it.
Yeah. And that's why it's really important to kind of shop around and as someone else said, date your species. That like you need
That's funny.
to figure out that, and that takes some exploration, and that's okay. Someone else said, learning the difference between people I like and people that are good for me is hard. The inner people pleaser is a hard thing to deal with. Yeah. But we don't belong everywhere we go. And that's okay. Okay. Any questions that you guys want to ask now? I will offer time after I turn off the recording too, if you rather wait. But yes, I am welcome to questions.
I want to say that I appreciate you saying that it's okay to not fit in everywhere because I struggle with that. Like there's no reason why people shouldn't like me. I try and be nice to people, and it took me, like I said, it was a tough lesson to learn. It's okay if I don't fit with those people.
Mm-hmm.
It's perfectly fine.
And like we hope that when we don't fit in with people, we can still like respect them for who they are. You know, like you said, with like, I'm not necessarily gonna vibe all the time with a swinger lifestyle personally. But that's not a bad thing for some people. You know, if they're doing their thing, all the more power to them. I'm gonna be like, you go have fun and like make the best of your weekend with that lifestyle. And I'm gonna be over here in my kinky, queer, polyamorous, sometimes leather world. And that's okay.
Yeah, it's like what they say, don't yuck somebody else's yum.
Damn right. Damn right. It's all yummy, just different flavors.
I like that.
I'm curious about, if I could, I think like I'd love your take on what we sometimes run into where like there's a subset of people in kink, and like I've been one of them. I'm not saying this with any judgment, but like a subset of folks within kink, particularly who lean into like kind of like extreme DS, who seem to almost be like courting trauma and trauma responses in the way that they're playing, the way they're trying to connect. And I wonder about like, um, I don't know, like part of it is like an ethical question about like being okay doing that and like with an untrained eye, I suppose. And then also like I guess that like the I don't know, like navigating a scene in which that like I think you can consent to like most things you want to, while also recognizing that like there's a lot of things that we can consent to that could cause us great and ongoing harm.
Mhm. That's definitely true. Um, so I like to think about that in a couple different ways. One, we all got types. Um, and I am a power exchange person. I even like owner property dynamics, which might be labeled as more of that extreme DS. And I also have a type that is like that eldest daughter trauma. Like if I'm going for a girl, it's all I will find out after I've started dating them that like they have that eldest daughter trauma. And it is very interesting to me. And at first when I was doing my internal evaluation of it, I was like, oh God, what's wrong with me that I'm going after this type of like trauma thing? And I realized it's a matching of my own trauma a lot of the time. The fact that someone rose up to take care of themselves and others in hardship and not just like withering away, that they have that like fire when they are faced with fire, um, is partly soothing and calming to my own trauma background. And that's okay. Like, as long as you're doing it mindfully and taking it all seriously. Um, that is my one problem sometimes with people who, uh, like as you said, kind of chase trauma reactions or trauma symptoms in people, is that they don't take it seriously. Whatever your kink craft is, whatever your sex positive lifestyle thing craft is, I encourage you to take it seriously. Uh, you know, if you're into, you know, leather, you're gonna take leather seriously, and the different types and the different hides and the different da 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 da. Same thing with a power exchange sort of thing. Look into the psychology of the types of kinks you engage in that power exchange. Look at the psychology of power dynamics in society in general. Look at the power dynamics within your race relationship, your age relationship, your able-bodied versus disabled-bodied relationship, all these different things. And then if you're doing it in that mindful way, okay, have fun. Is, you know, include some harm reduction philosophy. I'm very much a harm reduction person. You know, you can't do anything 100% safely, but if you're doing it with consent and the eye of reducing harm and healing, most of the time I think going to be good for everyone involved. You know, there's always the possibility of like you do everything right and shit still goes wrong. That does happen. But then you are more engaged in the mind of being able to heal through that error or crisis moment to move through it in a way that heals, and that can be just as powerful. Sometimes mistakes are lessons, and we try to view them that way, and so we don't do them again.
I appreciate that. I think for me is just like because I'm kind of like in the deep end of the pool on a couple of intersections of humiliation play and degradation play and ownership oriented dynamics, and like the interesting thing of being just like I will do like some deep end of the pool stuff on that, but also like for me example like using terms like slaves outside of my ethics because I'm not from a history of enslaved people, and therefore that's outside of mine. I don't judge anybody who uses that, but it wouldn't feel right on the line for me.
Mhm.
And I think that like yeah, you're actually like hitting it on the head there in terms of just like the piece that I hadn't quite articulated yet was like the lack of intent and like ongoing engagement with it as like with this as like evolving practice.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
That's why I
I think
love
that
the
that's
word
good language.
craft. for it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that like that as craft and like and I think that like there's a piece there too that I'm going to chew on a little bit about like what does it look like to for those of us engaged in power dynamics, what does it look like to in an ongoing way be a practitioner of craft from the S side of that?
Mm.
Because I think that like one of the things I think that like really jumbles me up sometimes is like there's a thing in community that says, and I'm not sure I'm being precise about this, but I'm gonna give this some thought further. Um, there's a thing in the community and says that like dominance is a thing that is done to submissives versus a state that's co-created with both people and active participation, things like that. And so yeah, so I think there's a piece of that there that like goes to the intentionality you're speaking to that's also about like willing participation in a way that is also like where everybody's viewing this as harm reduction is I think some of what like gets my hackles up on an instinctual level, but I don't always have the language to articulate like that's the thing.
Yeah. Well, the dual flow of responsibility and agency within a relationship between a dominant and submissive side of things, it does need to go both ways. Like it's not just about the dominant, like you said, doing upon others. And that's how I do my trauma informed DS relationships, is often to keep in mind that I have my own trauma. I have my own crazy. And I want my submissives to feel empowered in their agency enough to call me out and enough to serve my purpose and pleasure, or my house's purpose and pleasure, even when I'm going crazy. And to serve themselves in that way, because that is part of my purpose too. And that helps me thinking about it that way, like they're serving my purpose, not necessarily me. And that helps me understand it and communicate it to my submissives. But that's part of being trauma informed, is like giving them permission to be autonomous when it serves the dynamic, and also being autonomous for themselves when it serves their health too. That's a complicated mix of things too. It's
Does
not
that go
easy.
into the fluidity you were talking about earlier?
A little bit, yeah. Because settings change, environment change, you got to be
Yeah.
fluid with it all. All righty. That's so good. Good discussion, guys. Thank you. All right.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Very
Yeah.
insightful.
Yeah. If y'all want to learn more about me, you can follow me on any of the different platforms. I have my link tree up there. Puts you onto my YouTube where I post some classes, my Instagram, all those different things. I am out as like a kinky clinician, so be respectful of any vanillas you might be interacting with on any of those platforms. But otherwise, like, be respectful that there's multiple populations mixing a lot of my platforms. And feel free to reach out if you want further education for your groups or coaching services or anything like that. And thank you. Thank you really for coming tonight. For anyone who's watching this video, I really appreciate you learning about the subject to increase your own skills and to be more mindful of attachment and trauma in y'all's lives. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you. Do you accept
Thank you.
FetLife friend requests or you prefer follows?
I am okay with, since we have communicated in this class, with friend requests.
Okay. That's
You
kind of
know,
my rule. So
talking
if I
is
interact with
my,
people,
yeah,
same.
yeah,
Yeah,
I have to
that's how I am.
interact.
Yeah, exactly. If I interacted with you, that's my criteria. For
Exactly.
me, that's why I was asking for you, because everybody has their own policies. So I was trying to be respectful.
Thank you. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Hmm.
Yeah, but feel free to follow me if you're just watching along. And feel free to message me if you want to chit chat, because I love chit chatting with people and talking about these things. So thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good night.